One of the coolest aspects of the DC universe is the skill set of its street level characters and how their knowledge in hand-to-hand combat allows them to contend with enhanced individuals, effectively holding their own against the countless metahumans scattered throughout the universe. This, combined with the intelligence and arsenal of some of these characters like Batman or Nightwing, make them very noteworthy crime fighters, despite not having any superpowers of their own. Given the impressive showings from these players over the decades, there inevitably comes the question of who's actually the best of the bunch when it comes to pure martial arts and hand-to-hand combat. Which is something I thought would be interesting to tackle because with the various opinions roaming around online, I'm seeing a lot of misconceptions and the surprising downplay of some of the very prominent street tiers. I'll be tackling the subject matter with K the God. He makes really good content, and if you are a fan of DC, I'd highly recommend checking out his YouTube and TikTok, both of which will be linked in the top of the description. I'm telling you, this guy knows ball.
I like this one.
Everybody's gonna have their own opinion on who should be considered DC's best, as it can be a very subjective topic. But I'm seeing way too many people downplay Batman's role in all of this. To say that Batman isn't even amongst the top 5 or even top 10 is ridiculous. In the past, I was under the impression that Batman couldn't be considered the best fighter in DC due to some of the statements of other characters being labeled as the best in the world. Putting specific characters above Batman in terms of martial arts skill has been a popular talking point. But if I'm being honest, having Batman in the top 3 among all the prominent martial artists, or even regarding him as the best in the verse, isn't really that crazy. Whenever I see people try to rank the top 5 or 10 best street tier DC martial artists, they often don't take into account how these characters improve throughout their publication history. They're constantly honing their skills and training to better themselves. So Batman and Nightwing today, for example, have vastly improved compared to how they were depicted during the post-crisis era. Just because someone was above those two back in 2005 or something, that doesn't automatically mean that that character is still better than them currently, unless actual modern feats prove otherwise. I've seen people claim that Batman fans only take issue with him not being considered among the top 3 or the best DC martial artist because they want him to be the best at absolutely everything. This is a bit of a straw man. Batman does not need to be the absolute best at every single field imaginable. You want to say Mr. Terrific is more knowledgeable in technology relating to traveling dimensions and universes? I wouldn't argue against it. Dr. William Magnus being the leading expert in android artificial intelligence? I think that's completely valid. But the two things DC has consistently pushed for literal decades when it comes to Batman is him being a top tier martial arts expert and detective. We're talking about the same dude who has mastered every single fighting style on Earth and even studied alien martial arts when he was off planet during the first couple of years of his career. Batman has the most consistent statements out of any DC character to be the best in the verse, which will be covered more in a little bit. Why would it be out of pocket for someone to assume that he'd be at the bare minimum in the top 3? I used to be of the mentality that the author's word outside the actual text was gospel and worth taking at face value when it comes to determining the skill set of characters. But there's a major problem with this. To clarify, I am not saying that the thought process or opinion of the author doesn't hold any weight. Obviously, it should be taken into account. It just isn't the end-all be-all, especially if said opinion is never properly depicted or substantiated by anything officially released. The first point I want to bring up is a boxing sparring match between Dinah Lance and Bruce Wayne in an issue of Tom Taylor's Detective Comics run, where Tom Taylor himself gave his interpretation of who's the more skilled fighter, verbatim stating, "I love Batman. I'm literally the writer of Detective Comics. He's one of the top heroes in the world. Dinah Lance is a better fighter than him. So is Cass Cain. Batman doesn't need you to defend him, he's Batman."
Get going and have
great.
some fresh new ideas on how to
wow.
He just wants to be taken seriously. Like, we all do.
I think this would get a lot less pushback if a writer at DC was of the opinion that someone like Lady Shiva was above Batman if they were to take statements of her being the world's best martial artist at face value, or highlighting other characters who are consistently stated to be second to or equal to Batman in terms of skill. But Black Canary? People need to understand that the opinions of the writer do not take higher precedence over what's actually written in the comics and guidebooks. Tom Taylor can believe Black Canary is a better fighter all he wants, but it's not actual canon unless it is effectively shown in the source material. This is just an unsubstantiated claim. Detective Comics issue 1107 has Bruce enter a sparring match against Dinah with the winner decided by knockout, but they don't actually make any physical contact with one another. Rather, Cassandra Cain is the referee and uses her body reading to see any attacks before they happen, reading their intentions without them needing to actually connect. Literally all this showed is that Dinah is more proficient at boxing, mainly because she spent more time training with Ted Grant Wildcat, who taught both her and Bruce, and they were Ted Grant's star pupils. Having better mastery mastery of one style doesn't equate to being the better overall fighter. Again, Bruce didn't just learn every martial art known to man, he mastered every single one. Dinah made it clear that their sparring match would be limited strictly to boxing and nothing else. If Dinah is the better overall fighter based solely on the possibility that she's superior in boxing,
I'm the King of England.
And people say I'm crazy.
Tom Taylor could go on Twitter and say that Black Canary is hotter than Catwoman. Do I now have to accept that sentiment as canon material because it came from a DC Comics writer? No, because God forbid I switch up on Selena like that. But more importantly, he would be saying that with nothing in the books to substantiate that claim, because that would just be his opinion. Writers tend to have disagreements and their own distinct takes on characters. I mean, look at Chuck Dixon, the guy who created the Birds of Prey team and has written a pretty sizable amount of definitive stories surrounding the Bat family characters during the post-crisis era. He completely disagrees with Taylor and thinks that Black Canary shouldn't stand a chance in a boxing match against Batman. Some may argue that this doesn't carry as much weight in the current conversation because Chuck Dixon hasn't written for DC in many years. But the same thing of writers having different takes still applies to those who are currently at the company.
There was a summit a decade ago. Scott was there, Becky Cloonan was there, I was there, Steve Orlando, Josh was there. And we were pitching like the next Bat event, is when Scott was still on the book. And then the pitch on the table was this thing called Night Fight, which has become almost an infamous pitch. We all just pitch it to each other. This thing where there would be like sort of a triangle, and each of the Bat characters had to fight until one was the best fighter in the entire world. Like someone made them fight, and it's sort of beyond.
Okay, all right.
And it was called Night Fight, and we would have all these arguments over who would win this, and it became this giant who would win with all the DC writers. And it was great because, you know, we would be like, Cassandra Cain has to win. She's the best fighter. And then Scott would be like, and then she takes off her mask and it's Bruce Wayne. And he was behind it the whole time. And then, and then we'd be like, no. The best fighter is Damian Wayne is the best fighter. He's like, yeah, he wins. And then he takes off his mask. He reveals he was on stilts and it was actually Bruce Wayne. Like Scott has, like Batman had to be the one on top.
Tom King is someone who thinks Batman would get his ass kicked by Lady Shiva and Black Canary if he got in the ring with either one of them. I would caution against taking any of King's stances on ranking DC fighters seriously, given his terrible ranking of the best fighters in the Bat family back in 2017, and the fact that in the Black Canary Best of the Best miniseries, he had Batman say that he was never able to kick down a tree, which is completely nonsensical. Not only did Bruce kick down a tree with relative ease in year 1, Tom King literally wrote him doing that same thing in his Batman run during the Rebirth era. It's also a bit humorous how Tom King put Cass above Bruce in his ranking, yet a couple of years later, he had her and several other Bat family members lose in a 7v1 against Thomas Wayne Batman in the Batcave, and had Bruce be the only one in the Bat family who could actually contend with Thomas Wayne Batman in a fight. I don't know, I just find that kind of funny. Another example of writers not being on the same page is that Tom Taylor doesn't think Batman is the best detective, and instead believes Detective Chimp is the superior one. Yet, in Tom King's Wonder Woman run, it's reaffirmed that Batman is still the world's greatest detective. Diana knows both Detective Chimp and Batman, yet she explains she went to Bruce specifically to solve the murder of Ares because he's actually the best detective. This was after Wonder Woman worked alongside Detective Chimp to uncover some secrets about the Sovereign a few issues prior. So what then? I mean, it's been more consistently stated than not for decades that Batman is the world's greatest detective. It's literally one of his most iconic monikers. The opinion of one writer, based on his interactions with people on Twitter who think otherwise, isn't going to greatly change that. Which is why it's very important to go by what's consistently shown in the books themselves rather than just going, Black Canary is better than Batman because Tom Taylor said so.
Oh, I don't care.
And I did say that Batman's notable statements of being the best would be covered in more detail, so let's go ahead and show the receipts. Okay, you're up.
One of the most important things to go over when discussing the martial arts ranking in the DC universe is which characters receive the most statements of being the best fighter / martial artist in said universe. And when it comes to DC, Batman easily has the best and most consistent statements of being the best martial artist / fighter in this universe. And to try and cope around this, a lot of people argue that it's because of the fact that Batman has the most appearances out of all of the other martial artists within the DC universe, which is true. However, this falls apart when you take into account that even in the current day, Batman is still receiving statements of being the best fighter. So no matter how you slice it, whichever era you look at, whether it's pre-crisis or post-crisis or late post-crisis, New 52, Rebirth, Dawn of DC, current All In, Batman just has the most statements of being the best. And the only other martial artist in the DC universe that comes close when it comes to quantity of statements is Lady Shiva. However, as you'll see shortly in this video, there's a lot of context surrounding both Batman and Shiva specifically. But again, Batman having such a large magnitude of these statements paints a picture of what DC is trying to tell us narratively. So piggybacking off of what Adaptations was talking about a few moments ago, a handful of writers holding the opinion that Batman is worse than a fighter who's never been in contention for the top spot in the DC universe narratively is just something that we shouldn't take into account. Especially when you take into account that there's a boatload of evidence that contradicts that stance. For example, if we look at all of the encounters that Batman and Black Canary have had over the years, he has never had a problem with her in the slightest. For example, if we look at their first fight in JLA 1960 number 190, we see that a mind-controlled Black Canary is squaring off against Batman. Now it's important to note that even though she is mind-controlled, it's verbatim stated that she has all of her martial arts skill. And this is a Black Canary that is bloodlusted trying to kill Batman because of the fact that again she's mind-controlled. Despite this being the case, Batman is still able to evade all of her attacks, and for some reason the narration still says it's an even fight, but as we can see visually, it's clearly not. He's dodging all of her attacks, he's then able to counter her with a judo throw and then one-shot her. Then if we look at their next legitimate fight, which takes place in Vixen Return of the Lion number 5 and is set canonically before the events of Batman RIP, we have yet again a mind-controlled Black Canary facing off against Batman. Because she's mind-controlled and likely not holding back, she opens up with her canary cry, but Batman easily disables her with hardening foam to the jaw, and then he one-shots her with a kick. Not only does this fight showcase that Batman is faster than Canary with him effectively blitzing her, he's also consistently just one-shot levels above her. And ladies and gentlemen, this is why in Birds of Prey 1998 number 79, we have Black Canary say out of her own mouth that she isn't stupid enough to threaten Batman. It's because Batman has routinely been better than her.
Yes, sir! This nigga spitting. Damn, nigga!
I know a bunch of people are going to bring up the Black Canary Best of the Best miniseries that came out last year, where she fought Shiva in a match that was broadcast around the world to determine who was the greatest hand-to-hand fighter in the world. The canonicity of this book is called into question for a couple of reasons. Not only because of the stupid page where Batman says he's never kicked down a tree for some reason, but there's also the fact that Batman is operating in the Batcave under Wayne Manor and Alfred is still alive. If this story is supposed to be set in the present day, it literally cannot be canon. But I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and assume that it must have taken place prior to Alfred's death, so around the 2016 era or even earlier. If that's the case, it actually makes Black Canary look even worse when trying to place her among the top 5 fighters in the verse. In the canonical years following that story, she would go on to struggle in hand-to-hand combat against a weakened Deathstroke who was holding back. The same version of Deathstroke that was stated to be slower than usual was outmatched by Ghostmaker relatively quickly. Then an amped version of Slade, who was brought back to life by the Lazarus Pit and imbued with the Great Darkness, lost to a 1v1 against Nightwing. There's also the fact that before it was stated that Slade had gotten slower leading up to Dark Crisis, and during the first handful of issues of the Deathstroke Incorporated series, he lost in an all-out 1v1 against Batman. So regardless of how you want to interpret the canonicity of Best of the Best, it's not looking too good for Dinah Lance.
It's not looking good, bruv. It's not looking good.
Lady Shiva is inarguably a very skilled combatant and has a reputation for being among the best in the world. Many people would argue that Lady Shiva is better than Batman simply because of her being titled the world's greatest fighter or martial artist from time to time. Which, by that logic, shouldn't Batman be better considering he has more statements, which Kay just went over? Since so many characters have been labeled the world's greatest fighter or the greatest martial artist on the planet, whether it be Cassandra Cain, sometimes it's in regards to Connor Hawke, Lady Shiva, or others, in situations like this, it's best to go by what is most consistent and most frequent, on top of the character's actual feats and accomplishments. A lot of people like to say that Lady Shiva is the best because she has beaten Batman or destroyed him in a fair fight on multiple occasions. Hate to burst your bubble, but you're gonna have a hard time finding any comic panels or pages of that actually happening, because they simply don't exist. You can try to use post-crisis or even modern post-Infinite Frontier, doesn't matter to me.
I'm not too picky.
People like to use this one page from Detective Comics where it seems like Shiva pins down Batman in seconds with little to no effort. While it is an impressive feat, there is missing context to this encounter. In the issue prior, Batman gets shot in his right shoulder while fleeing from a building, and you can see Lady Shiva hiding in the shadows watching all that's transpired. So when she meets up with Batman on a rooftop in the following issue, she immediately targets the wounded shoulder to take him down in quick succession. She even admits that she fought dirty and would like the chance to fight Batman properly with no tricks or schemes, just a fair 1v1 between the two. On the DC website, there's a blog post that lists 6 of Batman's greatest defeats in comics, and that specific encounter between Shiva and Batman in Detective Comics issue 952 is listed as number 1. So you might think, well, because it was listed on the DC website and the person who wrote it said it was a fair fight, that means it's a valid win for Shiva. Here's the problem. DC blog posts are not indicative of what actually happened definitively. They are the opinions of the person who wrote the blog in the first place. If you scroll down, there's literally a note verbatim stating, "The views and opinions expressed in this feature are solely that of Alex Jaffe, and do not necessarily reflect those of DC Entertainment or Warner Brothers." This dude is not an editor or writer for DC Comics, and I've already disproved the sentiment of this even being considered a fair fight. But you'll never guess who actually has beaten Shiva in a fair 1v1 fight. Superman Batman issue 3 features Shiva fighting Batman one-on-one, and Batman had always wondered who was the better fighter between the two, regardless of whether or not she was mind controlled. He then proceeds to knock her out, securing the W. Many people make the argument that this isn't a valid win because Shiva would have been nerfed due to Gorilla Grodd's mind control. That way of thinking isn't gonna work here, bro chacho. I'm arguing against that because whenever Gorilla Grodd utilizes his telepathy, he has full knowledge of a person's abilities, regardless of whether or not they're a metahuman, and he can put their abilities to better use. Even if Grodd isn't directly controlling every single action someone takes, his telepathy can work in a way that convinces others of a specific idea or ideology, while still maintaining their personality and skill set. You can see in the dialogue boxes when Grodd is actually taking direct control over someone's every move, which clearly wasn't the case with Shiva. That encounter being a valid win for Batman is further proved by the 2018 DC Comics Absolutely Everything You Need to Know guidebook, which has a section dedicated to providing an overview of select characters who have mastered martial arts throughout the different eras of DC, taking into account pre-Crisis, post-Crisis, and post-New 52. And over on the right, there's a list of the top 3 characters who have actually beaten Lady Shiva in a fair fight. And what do you know? Batman is listed as one of them. Can't really argue against that.
You got knocked the Never mind.
Like her mother Shiva, Cassandra Cain is without a doubt a very accomplished fighter, being a master of all forms of unarmed combat and having the ability to predict the moves of her opponents with her advanced body reading. In the post-crisis era, she bested Shiva in an all-out one-on-one fight and took the title the greatest martial artist in the world from her mother, but I'll talk more about the fraudulent legitimacy of that title in detail later. That being said, the same thing I went over with Shiva applies to Cass, where people like to claim that she's beaten Batman in a fair 1v1 fight, but that also isn't true. There are two specific instances people like to bring up. One of them is Cass having her foot on Batman while he's on the ground, as he takes note of the fact that she's been training. This means nothing because she got the drop on him after he was exposed to Scarecrow's experimental mind control tech, which threw off Batman's equilibrium to such an extent he couldn't even hear her coming, verbatim stating, "Nobody should be able to get the drop on me like that." She only flipped him over because she didn't know Batman was coming to the clock tower and thought he could have been a possible intruder. She also believed Batman might have died earlier. This other page in Detective Comics during the Rebirth era also doesn't mean jack because he's severely holding back. He's not even attempting to put up a fight and doesn't throw a single punch or block, literally stating, "I won't fight you. You can hurt me all you want. I won't do it." Granted, Batman himself believed he would lose in an all-out fight against Cass during the 2016 Detective Comics run, but I don't think this sentiment would stack up in the current day given how much Batman has improved. And more recent comics have Batman reaffirming that he is in fact the best from his inner monologue, and that sentiment is further substantiated by characters like Jason Todd, someone who was trained by Shiva. Don't get me wrong, Cass is still an excellent fighter, she just wouldn't no-diff Batman like some people proclaim. Shiva and Cass have been pretty relative to one another over the years, with Cass notably beating her in the post-crisis era, but since Rebirth, it's been made very apparent that Shiva is just blatantly more skilled than Cass. Both Cassandra and Shiva have acknowledged that Cass would lose in a proper 1v1. In their most recent legitimate encounter in Batman and the Outsiders, Shiva just outright outskilled her. As stated earlier, one of Cass's most valued assets is her body reading, where she can interpret body movements similar to how someone reads a newspaper. But if Cass goes up against someone who can counteract her body reading and whose movements are harder to get a grasp of, she can and has struggled. Her first encounter with Deathstroke was difficult because reading his body movements was too much for her to follow. When Red Hood first encountered Cassandra in the New 52, he was able to recognize her utilization of body reading during their fight and acknowledged that the best way to counteract it would be to surprise himself with his attacks. The first issue of the most recent Birds of Prey series had Cassandra struggling in her fight against Harley Harley Quinn due to her unpredictable nature and not being able to properly read Harley's body movements, verbatim stating that Harley almost beat her in that fight. So if multiple characters can counteract her body reading to some extent, I don't understand why Batman couldn't do the same thing just as, if not more efficiently, considering he's more skilled than all of those I just mentioned. Batman is very proficient at combining the different styles he's mastered to create his own unique fighting style, like when he made his own technique to fight the Batman who laughs, who is leaner and faster. In a hypothetical 1v1, all he would have to do against Cass is switch up his fight moves instantaneously. In the post-crisis era, which is the time period people like to use to justify putting Cass above Batman, she believed Batman's detective skills, stealth, and fighting ability were irreplaceable after his supposed death in Final Crisis. This is further substantiated in the current era by the fact that Cass struggles to replicate Batman's specific fighting style when she tries to fight Shiva using some of Batman's repertoire of martial arts. It's also been shown that on her own, Cass has difficulty fighting characters like Karma, who wears a helmet that allows him to read the minds of his opponents and anticipate every move they're going to make. Both Batman and Nightwing have performed better against characters with similar abilities. Batman outperformed Grifter, someone who can literally read minds, and Dick Grayson was able to outskill Midnighter in a fight, someone equipped with a neural combat simulator programmed with every single possible scenario of a fight before it happens. Yet Dick still whooped him, and this was after Midnighter had memorized all of his moves as Nightwing. Now on to our next character to assess when comparing their skill set to Batman. I'll let Kay handle this one.
Get your special sock out, nerds. It's gonna get good.
Another character that is pushed to be over Batman when it comes to the martial arts is Karate Kid Val Armour from the Legion of Superheroes. Now, for those of you who don't know, Val Armour is not a slouch whatsoever. He's a master of all martial arts from the past, present, and future of the 31st century, and also in his entire galaxy. You could even make the argument that he's a master of most martial arts in the universe, considering that he's stated to be a master of martial arts on most worlds. And with each DC universe being infinite, whether it's Earth 0, Earth 3, Earth 1, etc., him being a master of martial arts on most worlds would definitely extend beyond galactic reach. Karate Kid has also done things like contend Superman level threats with his martial arts skill alone. And he's done this very consistently, whether it's against characters like Ekis or whether it's against Daxamites like Mon-El. However, when it comes to the likes of Batman, not only has Batman also consistently been able to harm Kryptonian tier characters with his pure martial arts ability, such as the time in Batman Confidential number 53 where he's able to outskill the entire Justice League with pure martial arts ability, including one-shotting the likes of Wonder Woman. He's also put hands on characters like Solomon Grundy routinely. Solomon Grundy is the same character who can box with the likes of Superman and the entire Justice League. And Batman has also one-shotted Kingdom Come Supergirl with a Kryptonian martial art. So from a feats perspective, Karate Kid and Batman are pretty comparable. As far as martial arts knowledge is concerned, not only has Batman also trained in a plethora of alien martial arts, including Kryptonian martial arts like I obviously just showcased, he's also as of 2024 stated to have unmatched martial arts knowledge in the DC universe. Now obviously this wouldn't be taking into account godhead characters like Ares, but other martial artists in the DC universe like Karate Kid, Wonder Woman, Shiva, Black Canary, etc. would all fall under that umbrella and be inferior to Batman when it comes to overall martial arts knowledge. And this again says a lot considering how much martial arts characters like Lady Shiva and Karate Kid already know themselves, with Lady Shiva herself having statements of having universal mastery over martial arts. That being said, the reason why Batman is superior to the likes of Karate Kid is because both of their encounters have context, and Karate Kid has also just kind of been power cliffed. The first fight that the two of them have takes place in two separate comics, one of the comics being Countdown number 50 and the other one being JLA 2006 number 8. If we look at the beginning of this encounter in JLA number 8, we see that a mind-controlled Karate Kid actually gets up and one-shots Black Lightning behind Batman, showcasing that Karate Kid is moving with the intent to put these two down. He then tries to do the same thing to Batman, but Batman reacts and counters, landing a hit. The fight then goes off panel but picks up later, showcasing that both of these characters are heavily battle damaged. However, it's revealed during this moment that Batman is actually outsmarting Karate Kid, maneuvering him to a position in which Black Lightning can off-guard him and end the fight. Now in Countdown number 50, we actually get a reimagination of what happens in that off-panel portion. So after Batman initially lands that first hit from the counter, he tries to throw another attack at Karate Kid, but Karate Kid hits him with a flurry of attacks, landing 3 hits. Batman then counters with an uppercut. So now, point-wise, Karate Kid is up 3 to Batman's 2. The two then get into another exchange in which Batman blocks a kick, Karate Kid blocks a strike, and then he counters with a palm strike across Batman's chest. Karate Kid now has 4 hits to Batman's 2, and then they get into another exchange in which they go dead equal, none of them landing a hit, but then Karate Kid is able to actually flip Batman over and disarm him of his belt. However, if we go back to JLA number 8, we know that Batman only allowed this to happen because of the fact that he was again positioning Karate Kid to get off guarded by Black Lightning. So even when Karate Kid thinks he has the fight won, Batman is actually a step ahead of him. That being said, it's important to note that after this fight, Batman does admit that Karate Kid did outfight him. And then he says that in a rematch, Karate Kid would not be able to do this. And this is likely true considering the fact that Karate Kid in the first fight was the aggressor because of him being mind controlled, and Batman was likely holding back. That being said, the next encounter is the one that actually showcases the disparity between the two. And this fight takes place in Brave and the Bold 2007 number 5, in which we have a Batman who is fleeing from the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st century facing off against Karate Kid. The fight starts with Karate Kid landing an off-guard attack on Batman that sends him hurling through anti-gravity and then allows Karate Kid to land a follow-up kick. Now, because of the fact that again Batman is completely off guard, these 2 hits shouldn't be taken into account as something that is impressive from Karate Kid. Because on the very next page, after Karate Kid lands that first attack and Batman gets his bearings, the two go extremely relative, with Karate Kid even noting that Batman's prowess on the ground is fabled and that he can learn a lot from Batman. Karate Kid also notes that he is a master of anti-gravity martial arts, and Batman is disadvantaged in this field because of the fact that he's not used to fighting in anti-gravity. So we have a disadvantaged holding back Batman going dead end relative to a Karate Kid who is not at a disadvantage and is also stating that he could learn a lot from Batman, which is Karate Kid in a way admitting inferiority to Batman. This is significant when you take into account that a lot of other characters in the DC universe have fought Batman around this same time period when he's not at a disadvantage and have either gone relative to him and in some cases have beaten him. An analogy that I could give you is, say that me and M Enterprises fought and I had one arm tied behind my back and we went equal. If another person were to step up and fight me when I had both of my arms free but still lose and still perform relative to me, that person should just be deemed a better fighter than M Enterprises because they did better when I was actually on equal footing. And this is why I say that Karate Kid has been power clipped, because since that fight with Batman and anti-gravity, a lot of characters have fought Batman after that under normal circumstances and have performed relative. So while Karate Kid is still a very good fighter, in my opinion, he just wouldn't touch the top 5 in the modern day.
This relates back to what I mentioned earlier about people using scaling from way back when, say like the mid 90s to early 2000s, to try and justify their placement in modern day. So hypothetically, if it was stated that Karate Kid was above Lady Shiva or Batman back then, that doesn't automatically apply to current comics, especially if there aren't any feats or statements showing those characters remaining at that level, given how much characters like Lady Shiva and Batman have improved since. Lady Shiva during the post-crisis era was often regarded as the world's best fighter or the greatest martial artist on Earth, given her reputation and status in the martial arts underworld and having entered many tournaments globally. However, it's been shown that while maintaining this title, Shiva wasn't actually the greatest fighter in DC at that time. The title was a byproduct of how she was moving in the martial arts underground via tournaments and other arranged fights. Keep in mind, in some of the same encyclopedias that associate Shiva with being the best fighter, those same guidebooks state that Batman is actually quite possibly the greatest martial artist alive. He didn't have to enter some sort of tournament to earn that type of notoriety. That's just through his impressive showcase and skill. The same encyclopedia also stated that Nightwing was second only to Batman in terms of fighting skill. There are a couple of other notable characters I want to mention in regards to Lady Shiva's skill set, one of them being the son of Green Arrow, Connor Hawke, who was highly regarded for his martial arts prowess and even fought Lady Shiva to a standstill. The other is Richard Dragon, who was taught by Bronze Tiger and honed his skills to be one of the best fighters around. He trained Batman and a multitude of other heroes. Richard Dragon demonstrated his superiority to Shiva when it came to hand-to-hand combat during his all-out match against her in 2005, where he had bad sleep and had defeated a myriad of other fighters prior to his fight with her. Years after Connor Hawke's encounter with Shiva, he and Richard Dragon were evenly matched. Yet despite being superior to Shiva by this point, Connor Hawke was still stated to be the second best empty-hand fighter next to Shiva, and she still maintained the title of best martial artist despite that not actually being the case. The only reason Richard Dragon wasn't granted the title of greatest martial artist is that he allowed Shiva to win and kill him because he knew Neuron would bring him back to life. If I'm being honest, arguably the best human combatant during the latter half of post-crisis was Constantine Drakon. Shortly before and after the Richard Dragon miniseries by Chuck Dixon, Connor Hawke would get manhandled by Constantine Drakon in literally all of their encounters in hand-to-hand with his incredible speed, putting Drakon far above the likes of Lady Shiva, embarrassing both Connor Hawke and Speedy in a 2v1, with enough reaction speed to catch multiple arrows traveling midair. So Drakon would be well above Richard Dragon considering how much he humbled the guy who was evenly matched with Dragon, who was well above Shiva around 2005 to 2006. There's also the fact that Richard Dragon hasn't had any significant scaling since before the New 52, so it's hard for me to put him at the same pedestal he was back in 2005, when compared to how the martial artists of the DC Universe today stack up. Case in point, despite arguably being the best fighter who was miles above Shiva back then, Constantine Drakon of the more modern Prime Earth timeline recounts how he got absolutely dog-walked by Batman and had his jaw shattered. Drakon nowadays is well below the likes of Connor Hawke and Damian Wayne in terms of skill. Speaking of Damian
Wayne is another martial artist within the DC Universe that deserves to be in the conversation between who the best fighters are. Even though Damian Wayne is relatively young in comparison to everyone else on this list, he still hangs with the best of them, having shown to be relative to the likes of Connor Hawke as recent as Robin 2021. This fight obviously takes place during the Lazarus tournament, and before Damian Wayne and Connor Hawke's matchup, it's important to note that Damian Wayne actually had his arm broken by Flatline. Despite this, he still continues to go extremely relative to Connor Hawke, showcasing that not only are the two extremely relative when it comes to actual hand-to-hand skill, but they're also relative when it comes to speed. In fact, the only reason why Connor Hawke wins this fight is because of the fact that he's just stronger than Damian, so his hits do a lot more damage. This is why after Connor lands a couple of critical hits, Damian Wayne becomes slower and easier to react to. So again, the only thing really separating these two is the physical strength and durability. And this makes sense when you consider the fact that Damian Wayne, since he was like 3 years old, has been training to be the deadliest fighter on the earth. Having trained with superhuman Man-Bat League of Assassins members as a 9-year-old and being able to defeat them, also mastering every possible field before the age of 10, including martial arts ability, but then also having that training be augmented by the likes of Batman, it makes complete sense as to why Damian Wayne is as capable as he is even though he's so young. With Connor Hawke consistently being referred to as one of the greatest fighters on earth, Damian Wayne being relative to Connor should put him in that discussion.
Now we gotta talk about a few characters that have actually shown pretty decent direct relativity to Batman over the years. The first one I want to mention is a relatively new character, having made his first appearance in 2020, who would be no other than Ghostmaker. The main thing to take away from Ghostmaker is that he and Batman are essentially equals. They've had a growing rivalry throughout their careers, with Ghostmaker having the same training as Bruce, and both trying to one-up each other since their teenage years. In layman's terms, think of a Naruto and Sasuke kind of dynamic. Bruce and Ghostmaker were initially friends during their training abroad, as Ghostmaker wanted to be the best crime fighter in the world. They developed a friendly rivalry to improve upon the newly acquired skills they learned under some of the same teachers. Bruce felt comfortable enough to tell Ghostmaker where he came from, what happened to his parents, and why he sought out to be a crime fighter in the first place. Ghostmaker tried to kill Bruce in response as he believed Bruce was weak, becoming frustrated because he thought he found somebody who was training for the art of combat itself, not for what he saw as a childish pursuit of vengeance. Years following this, they would encounter one another from time to time to test their skills, with Ghostmaker more so wanting to prove himself as Bruce's superior. Prior to coming to Gotham after Joker War, Bruce had beaten Ghostmaker every time they went head to head since he turned 20, though Ghostmaker was able to incapacitate Batman one-on-one after trying to go after Clown Puncher, and afterwards, Batman and Ghostmaker showed direct relativity to one another in a quick sword fight. Eventually, Batman and Ghostmaker would come to terms, and Batman asks him to help out in dealing with crime in Gotham. He would then ask Ghostmaker to lead the new Batman Incorporated, as it would be difficult for Batman to split his time between Batman Incorporated and being the protector of Gotham. Batman himself stated that when he and Ghostmaker are at their peaks, they're each other's equals, so theoretically an all-out fight between the two could go either way. However, I'd give the edge to Batman since he's defeated Ghostmaker in combat more times than not, and more recently in Chip Zdarsky's run, he was able to take down an alternate Earth version of Ghostmaker who was amped with venom.
I trust you have not forgotten me, Batman.
Azrael.
Another character deserving of a spot when it comes to the best fighters in DC is Jean-Paul Valley Azrael, and he's probably the most underrated character on this list. That being said, out of all the characters here, Jean-Paul Valley Azrael is actually one of the few that have beaten Batman fairly without any context whatsoever. And this fight takes place in Azrael Agent of the Bat number 99, where we see a Jean-Paul Valley Azrael who is fatigued from having previously just fought a hallucination that was in his mind, go high in relative to and beat a Batman who was actually trying to bring him in. Now obviously Obviously, we know that this isn't only due to Azrael's skill because of the fact that unlike Batman, Azrael is superhuman. However, this doesn't make the showing any less impressive than it is because of the fact that Batman has routinely gone up against superhumans who are extremely skilled like Deathstroke the Terminator and has had light work with them. Batman at this point in time was also comfortably above the likes of Dick Grayson, who was also comfortably above the likes of Deathstroke. Another really great showing from Azrael is his fight against Cassandra Cain and also Batwoman in a 2v1 while he was mentally compromised by the effects of the system. Now, this fight initially starts off with Azrael doing most of the damage that he does to Batwoman instead of Cassandra Cain because she's more evasive, and because of the constant pressure from these two combatants, they end up disarming Azrael from all of his weaponry, forcing him to rely specifically on hand-to-hand combat. However, once this happens, the fight actually goes off panel for a moment, and when we come back to the fight, we see that not only is Azrael landing a hit on Cassandra Cain, he has also landed multiple hits because of the fact that we see her mask torn completely off. And again, if you were paying attention, her costume was in pristine condition before the POV switch. After a little bit more of a struggle, Azrael eventually does get taken down by both Cass and Batwoman, but the fact that he went high end relative to both of them while mentally nerfed says a lot about his skill. And again, just to drive this point home, we actually get another close-up of Cassandra Cain's suit, and as you can see, her face is bruised up, her suit has knuckle imprints all over it, and she's just overall battered. Meaning again that Azrael just was fighting relative to both of them at the same time. This is important because this was around the same time that Batman was saying that he could potentially lose to Cassandra Cain in a real deal fight. With Azrael showing high-end relativity to Cassandra Cain while in a 2v1 and mentally nerfed, one would logically conclude that Azrael could have also potentially beaten Batman at that point in time as well. This is also substantiated in Detective Comics 2016 number 950 when Azrael also fights a simulation that Batwing states that Batman himself uses to challenge himself and has never beaten. As far as Azrael's mental nerfs, we know that it's been documented by characters like Nightwing that the more angry he gets during a fight, the more bound he is to screw up. And this is something that's obviously established with the programming of the system all the way back in Night Quest. And this is literally why Azrael was driven insane when he had his tenure as Batman. We also have statements from Azrael himself that he's afraid to put on his mask because when he does so, it makes him more violent than he would like to be. And even more recently, we have further extrapolation upon this theory because of the fact that it's stated verbatim that while Azrael is a highly effective fighter, Jean-Paul finds it hard to keep his fire and brimstone personality in control. So he's effectively fighting two minds at the same time when he's in combat. And this is something that's also touched on by Azrael himself in Rebirth. This is why in certain encounters where Azrael is obviously emotionally conflicted, he underperforms. A perfect example of this would be his fight with Nightwing in Batman and Robin Eternal, and also his encounter with Tim Drake in Batman and Robin Eternal as well. With that being said, it's also important to note that the likes of Ra's al Ghul has stated that he's only ever seen martial prowess to the level of Azrael's in Batman. And at this point in time, canonically, Ra's al Ghul had already seen characters like Lady Shiva, Nightwing, Bronze Tiger, Richard Dragon, etc. So this is a really good statement, and it also ties into why Azrael was actually able to beat Batman later on in this era as well. Another skill edge that Azrael has actually comes from his programming with the system. And that's because of the fact that the system itself is actually derived from a mother box, so this grants Azrael effectively limitless knowledge. And from this, he gains what the Order dubs as unparalleled fighting skills, which is why before having received any actual training, he's able to instantly attain skills and fight relative to Batman. That being said, on top of Azrael having the system, Nightwing has verbatim said that Azrael is stronger and faster than him and also knows everything that he knows. And he says that this is the case because of the fact that they had the same teacher in Batman. And for those of you who don't know, Batman canonically taught Nightwing everything that he could, and Nightwing grabbed all of Batman's mastery. All of these factors are why JPV was a suitable candidate to pick up the mantle of Batman after Bane broke his back. And speaking of Bane, Azrael has routinely been showcased as a better fighter than Bane. And this is also noteworthy because in this same era, characters like Nightwing would struggle with Bane all the time. So with all this taken into account, Azrael definitely deserves a top spot among this list of fighters.
The character with probably the strongest argument for being placed on equal footing and the greatest potential to surpass the Dark Knight is Nightwing. Batman passed down everything he knew to Dick when he was Robin, including all forms of combat. Dick was coached as a circus acrobat since infancy and would go on to be the greatest acrobat on Earth. He's proven time and time again to be objectively the toughest and most skilled out of all the Robins in hand-to-hand. As recently as 2025, Batman acknowledges him as the best out of all the other Bat family members. Dick isn't just some statement warrior, he actually has the necessary feats and showings to prove that he's just as capable as his mentor. Both Nightwing and Batman have shown superiority over Deathstroke in their encounters with him in recent years, with Nightwing beating an amped Deathstroke one-on-one while severely injured. While I don't care as much about people wanting to put Nightwing above Batman compared to the other characters I mentioned, there are a few recent encounters between the two that I don't think really serve as valid showcases chances of Nightwing being the superior combatant. However, I also don't believe they demonstrate a significant skill gap between the two. The first one I'd like to bring up is when Batman was infected with a necrospore in the Titans Beast World event, which transforms people into different beasts, turning Batman into a giant wolf. The spores work in a way where the characters maintain their abilities while they're in a more animalistic form, and Nightwing points out how Batman had all of his abilities without any of the restraint. He also notes how the spores instinctively move to a stronger host when the opportunity arises. After Batman and Nightwing fall into the river, Nightwing emerges with Batman subdued in his wolf form. The issue I have with using this to justify placing Nightwing over Batman is that the way Batman in this animalistic state is knocked out happens off panel. Nightwing could have easily just used some gadget, sedative, electric currents in his Suprema sticks, whatever. I don't think this is a proper showcasing of superiority in martial arts skill. And while Batman's quote-unquote skill is intact, he clearly fights without rational thought, as seen with the other characters infected with the spores. Even though characters like Damian Wayne, who were infected with one of the spores, can use their martial arts ability, it's not going to be on the same level of finesse and tactic when it comes to their mentality, as they're going to initially be more reliant on using their claws and more vicious attacks. Even after Nightwing subdued him and made it to the surface, Batman got up almost immediately and decided to run off to the only place that made sense to him on a primal level. The fight in Gotham War isn't a valid win for Nightwing either, because he objectively was only able to land hits on Batman after off-guarding him. He gets one of his Eskrima sticks snapped in two by Batman's robotic hand, followed by a punch from Batman's non-robotic hand that sends him to the ground. While Batman is walking away and his back is turned, Nightwing hits him in the back of the head with a grappling gun, which gave Nightwing the opportunity to throw him out of a window and land a punch before Batman uses his enhanced hand to rip a car door off its hinges and smack Nightwing with it. After he dispatches Tim Drake, Batman proceeds to get caught off guard again by Nightwing, to which he leaps off the top floor of a building and dives headfirst to hit him on the head. Nightwing genuinely leaped off the window like this and didn't yell to get Batman's attention until after he was already mid-air and close to Batman's proximity. Batman wasn't looking behind him towards Nightwing's location initially because he literally had just finished taking care of Tim. I don't know how this wouldn't be considered an off guard. After Batman was killed in the DCAU tournament, he essentially cheated by bringing Apocalyptian armor equipped with a boom tube that would try and teleport him home if he was ever inactive for too long. In response, the Heart of Apocalypse created different worlds where Dick, Jason, Tim, and Damian became Batman in their respective fabricated realities. Bruce first stumbles upon an older Dick Grayson and was able to go high-end relative against him, despite the fact that this version of Batman was specifically designed by the Heart of Apocalypse to be better than Bruce. Well, I hope this more than proved that Batman does in fact rightfully belong on the highest pedestal when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. Batman is often used as a litmus test for how skilled an individual is at fighting. It's similar to how people use Superman to determine the strength of a fictional character from another universe, but applied to the martial arts landscape in DC. He objectively has received the most consistent and frequent statements referring to him as the best martial artist or combatant from characters both far below and high up on the martial arts pedigree, dating back all the way to the 1970s. Superman calls him Earth's greatest proponent, the time-traveling supervillain Kronos calls Batman Earth's greatest warrior, Atlanteans recognize him as the greatest fighter on Earth, Jason Todd and Dick Grayson have acknowledged Batman as the best that ever was or the best that ever will be. For some reason, people like to put Bronze Tiger above Batman, despite the fact that he got bodied by Dick in the Grayson series, and he admitted inferiority to Batman by calling him, you guessed it, the best in the world. Ra's al Ghul has lived for centuries thanks to the properties of the Lazarus Pit and has encountered a good amount of the characters listed in this video. He spent a lifetime training men and women to be weapons, yet he believes none have been as effective as Batman. Characters like Bronze Tiger and Lady Shiva have been a part of the League of Assassins at some point. And you want to know the funniest part about this? Tom Taylor was the one who wrote the comic that page comes from, further proving the point I made earlier in the video about the writer's opinion not superseding what's in the actual pages. There's some interchangeability throughout, but if I were to rank the top 10 street tier fighters, it would probably look something like this. Regardless of how you want to put one in front of the other, I think Batman, Nightwing, and Ghostmaker comfortably comprise the top 3. Nightwing and Ghostmaker in recent years have had the best legitimate feats and showings when it comes to having any high-end relativity to Batman. Lady Shiva has the most frequent statements behind Batman of being considered the best, and although that wasn't entirely accurate, her skill would still have to be notable and competent enough to be granted such a title to begin with. She's stated to have universal martial arts knowledge and is capable of at least going toe-to-toe with Batman. Characters like Cass have had some statements putting her above Batman, but sadly she doesn't really have the in-comic feats to back it up properly, and it's been proven that she is well below the likes of Lady Shiva. Despite Tom Taylor's statements, Black Canary hasn't really shown much to justify her being above Batman in terms of skill, let alone a top contender for being the best in DC. She's been a Deathstroke victim since before the New 52. Black Canary even admitted inferiority to Cass on multiple occasions in the 2023 Birds of Prey run. But that's all I got for this one. Special thanks to Kay for the breakdowns on some of the characters and their skill sets. Be sure to check out his content when you get the chance. Ranking the top tier DC fighters can be a very subjective and contentious topic, so I'm pretty sure everyone's gonna have their own distinct lists and justifications. But as for my stance, I think my job here is done.
I'm done here.